Who even knows her name? She's not relevant. She's just playing dress-up in politics. The words rolled off George Clooney's tongue with the casual arrogance of a man used to rooms bending in his favor. Cameras flashed. Laughter bubbled nervously from a corner of the audience. And for a split second, it seemed the insult might pass as just another quip from Hollywood royalty. But it didn't. It landed with a thud, sharp and humiliating, directed squarely at Representative Jasmine Crockett. The room froze. Crockett's face remained steady, her composure unshaken, but the tension in the air thickened like a storm cloud. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down, others stared at Clooney as if silently questioning whether he had truly gone that far. He had. Clooney leaned back in his chair, smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. It was the look of a man who thought charm could erase cruelty. To him, this was just another soundbite, a celebrity moment where his voice overshadowed all others. He thought the cameras would lap it up, that the audience would chuckle and move on. What he didn't realize was that he had just struck at the heart of something far bigger than himself. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't just another name to be brushed aside. She was a rising force, a voice for communities long ignored, a woman who had carved her place not with fame, but with grit. The silence wasn't the sound of agreement. It was the sound of anticipation. People could sense it. This wasn't going to end the way Clooney imagined. And Crockett knew it too. Her eyes didn't flinch, her posture didn't falter. She had faced worse than a smug actor's barbed tongue. But in this moment, with the nation watching, she understood that what she chose to do next would matter. This wasn't about personal insult. It was about dignity, respect, and the battle between appearance and truth. The cameras zoomed closer. The audience held its breath. Clooney thought he had won the room with a single jab. But what Crockett said next would not only silence the room, it would echo across the nation. The insult hung in the air like smoke from fire no one could ignore. It wasn't just a comment, it was a challenge. George Clooney, a man adored for decades on the silver screen, had decided to reduce Jasmine Crockett to a punchline. To his fans, it might have seemed like harmless banter. But to millions watching at home, it carried something heavier. The weight of power mocking the powerless, privilege dismissing perseverance. This wasn't just about two people in a room. This was about what each of them represented. Clooney embodied Hollywood, wealth, charisma, and a lifetime of applause. He didn't have to fight for space at the table. The table had always been set for him. Crockett, on the other hand, was the voice of communities that had been denied seats, voices, and dignity for generations. She wasn't handed a platform. She fought tooth and nail for every inch of it. The clash was bigger than celebrity versus politician. It was elitism versus lived reality. Clooney's words may have been aimed at Crockett, but they echoed to every young black woman who had ever been told she didn't belong. They reverberated through every immigrant family whose contributions were dismissed as invisible. They whispered to anyone who had ever been underestimated simply because of who they were. And that is why the stakes shot far higher than Clooney ever anticipated. This wasn't a late-night talk show quip that would vanish by morning. This was a cultural showdown. The moment exposed a deep fracture between image and truth, between those who wield influence because of spotlight and those who carry responsibility because of service. The room itself seemed to realize it. Journalists scribbled furiously, cameras zoomed in tighter, and whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Would Crockett take the insult and move on, letting Clooney control the narrative? Or would she confront it head-on, risking everything by standing her ground in front of the cameras? Behind that question was another, unspoken but powerful. What did this moment mean for the country watching? Was it going to be another instance of arrogance triumphing? Another story where the powerful walked away unscathed? Or was it about to flip into something unforgettable, where dignity outshined derision? Clooney had thrown down the gauntlet, whether he realized it or not. And Crockett, steady and unbothered, was about to decide whether to pick it up. But this wasn't only her fight. This was about representation itself, about the kind of voices America allows to rise. And as the room waited in breathless silence, one truth was already clear. what happened next wasn't going to stay in that room. It was going to change everything. George Clooney didn't stumble into this moment by accident. He was a man who had spent his entire life bathed in applause, a figure polished by Hollywood's brightest lights. From ER's charming doctor to Ocean's 11th suave ringleader, Clooney's image had always been one of effortless confidence. To millions, he wasn't just an actor, he was the embodiment of cool. And when you live decades being celebrated as the cleverest man in every room, it becomes easy to believe that every word you utter carries weight. That belief followed him beyond Hollywood. Clooney wasn't content with just being a movie star. He reinvented himself as a public intellectual, a humanitarian, a political voice. He sat at tables with world leaders, spoke on global crises, and was praised for stepping beyond celebrity into the realm of advocacy. He had money, he had influence, and he had the charm to make both seem palatable. To many, he wasn't just an actor with opinions. He was a serious man whose voice deserved to be heard. But here's the contradiction. Clooney's activism often lived in curated moments, carefully staged appearances, and well-worded speeches. He could speak passionately about justice while flying on private jets. He could criticize corruption while basking in the privileges of a system built for men like him. And when challenged, that same charm that won over Hollywood could turn into a sharp, dismissive arrogance. This wasn't the first time Clooney had leaned on that arrogance. Insiders whispered of his quick wit being as much a weapon as a gift. He had made journalists squirm with cutting remarks. He had brushed off colleagues with lines that stung more than they entertained. To him, these moments were performances, little victories in rooms where he always assumed he was the star. But what Clooney didn't understand was that politics isn't a film set. It's not scripted. It doesn't always bend to charisma. And in Jasmine Crockett, he wasn't facing another Hollywood reporter eager for a quote. He was facing a woman who had built her career in the trenches of public service. She wasn't dazzled by fame. She was grounded in something much deeper. Still, Clooney didn't see the danger. To him, Crockett was an easy target. A young black congresswoman without decades of celebrity clout. Someone he assumed the public barely knew. In his mind, dismissing her with a snide remark was low risk, high reward. It would get a laugh, maybe a headline, and then the cameras would turn back to him. But beneath that calculation was the flaw that had followed Clooney his entire career. He mistook charm for invincibility. He didn't realize that the world had changed. Audiences no longer accepted arrogance from men at the top without consequence. Social media had made receipts more powerful than reputations. And authenticity, something Crockett embodied, now carried more weight than any Hollywood smile. That's why the insult wasn't just cruel, it was revealing. It showed a Clooney many had suspected but rarely seen. A man who believed his fame gave him the right to diminish others. And the moment the words left his mouth, the spell broke. For the first time, his charisma didn't shield him. It exposed him. Clooney thought he was untouchable, but what he didn't know was that Crockett had come prepared. She wasn't walking into this conversation unarmed. She had lived her entire life gathering the kind of evidence, experience, and credibility that no Hollywood story could erase. And soon, the audience, both in that room and across the nation, would see the truth. The actor might have played many roles, but this time, he had cast himself as the villain. And villains, no matter how smooth, always meet their reckoning. Because what Clooney couldn't predict was that Crockett's response wouldn't just be sharp, it would be historic. She had the receipts, and she was ready to use them. Long before Jasmine Crockett found herself in the national spotlight, she was a fighter. Not the kind of fighter who came from privilege, but the kind who understood struggle because she lived it. Raised in modest circumstances, Crockett's story was not written in marble or spotlight. It was written in sacrifice, grit, and the quiet determination of someone who refused to let her community be silenced. She wasn't born into Hollywood fame or Washington connections. She was the daughter of ordinary people, grounded in the values of hard work and service. From a young age, Crockett understood what it meant to be underestimated. Teachers doubted her potential, peers questioned her ambitions, and society often told her, without words, that girls like her were supposed to shrink, not shine. But instead of shrinking, she rose. In school, she gravitated toward justice. She saw classmates pushed aside because of where they came from, watched families struggle under systems that seemed designed to keep them down. While others turned their heads, Crockett leaned in. She debated fiercely, studied relentlessly, and discovered a fire for law, not as a career to collect prestige, but as a weapon to protect the voiceless. Becoming an attorney was not easy. Law school itself was another battlefield. Crockett faced the whispers of those who questioned whether she belonged in those halls. But each doubt only sharpened her resolve. She graduated, not just as a lawyer, but as an advocate ready to take on the fights others were too afraid to touch. Her career began not in corporate towers, but in courtrooms where everyday people stood against overwhelming odds. She defended those who couldn't afford flashy legal teams, often standing shoulder to shoulder with families who felt invisible in the eyes of the law. These weren't glamorous cases. They didn't come with headlines or photo ops, but they came with meaning. Every victory, no matter how small, was a reminder that her voice mattered. Crockett's reputation grew, not because she sought fame, but because she embodied courage. She became known for asking the hard questions, for pushing back when others folded, for showing up in spaces where voices like hers had long been absent. And it wasn't long before people urged her to step into politics, not for ambition, but because her community needed her. Running for office was another uphill climb. She didn't have the luxury of celebrity endorsements or billionaire donors. What she had was people, neighbors, families, workers, who believed in her because they had seen her fight for them firsthand. They canvassed, donated in small amounts, and spread her message by word of mouth. She wasn't carried into office by wealth or privilege. She was carried by trust. And when she arrived in Congress, she carried that same energy with her. Crockett was unapologetically herself, outspoken, passionate, unwilling to water down her convictions for the sake of comfort. To some, that made her polarizing. To others, it made her powerful. She represented those who had long felt ignored, and she refused to let their stories be drowned out in political noise. This was the woman George Clooney tried to dismiss. But what he didn't realize was that every insult she had ever endured had prepared her for moments like this. Every teacher who doubted her, every opponent who underestimated her, every barrier she climbed, they all built the armor she now wore. Crockett's power wasn't in the applause of the elite. It was in the lived experiences she carried with her. She wasn't speaking for herself alone. She was speaking for every person who had been silenced, sidelined, or sneered at. That was her strength, and that was why Clooney's jab couldn't break her. And as the room waited for her reply, there was something electric in the air. People sensed that Crockett wasn't about to simply defend herself. She was about to shift the balance of the entire conversation. Her story had brought her here, to this moment, where truth and dignity would face off against arrogance and privilege. Clooney had underestimated her. He thought he was taking aim at an easy target. Instead, he had handed her the stage. And soon, everyone would realize that Jasmine Crockett was not a name to forget. She was a name to remember. What came next would prove it. The silence after Clooney's insult stretched like a taut wire, humming with tension. The cameras panned across the audience. Furrowed brows, uneasy shuffles, lips pressed tight to stifle reactions. Everyone knew the air had shifted. What began as a polite conversation had turned into something raw, something dangerous. Clooney, still leaning back with his trademark grin, seemed oblivious to the storm he had stirred. He raised his eyebrows as if daring Crockett to respond, his smirk a silent taunt. He was used to being the cleverest man in the room, the one who delivered the zinger that ended the exchange. His fans expected it. He expected it. But Crockett didn't bite. Not yet. She sat poised, her expression calm, her eyes fixed on him, not in anger, but in focus. That composure unsettled him more than outrage ever could. It was the kind of calm that signaled preparation, the kind of silence that meant the other shoe was about to drop. Still, Clooney couldn't help himself. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. Look, politics is a grown-up game. If you want to make an impact, you don't do it by shouting in committees or dressing for headlines. You need substance. And I'm sorry, but that's not what you're bringing. Gasps rippled through the audience. Some shifted in their seats, visibly uncomfortable. Others locked eyes with Crockett, silently urging her to strike back. Clooney thought he was digging the knife deeper. What he didn't realize was that each word only sharpened the contrast between them. Crockett finally leaned in, her voice steady, low, almost disarmingly calm. So what you're saying, she asked, is that service doesn't matter unless it comes with your kind of spotlight? Her words weren't an attack. They were a mirror. And suddenly, Clooney's confidence wavered. The crowd reacted with murmurs, nods, a few scattered claps. Clooney tried to brush it off, laughing lightly. But his laugh sounded thinner this time, forced. Don't twist my words, he said quickly. I'm just saying, experience matters. But the audience heard what he hadn't said, that he believed her experience wasn't enough. And that unspoken assumption, that air of superiority, only set the stage for the moment to come. Crockett didn't rush. She let the silence stretch again, controlling the rhythm of the exchange. For the first time, Clooney wasn't leading the scene. He was reacting to her pace. She folded her hands on the table, her gaze steady, and the room seemed to lean in. What would she reveal? Would she match his insult with one of her own? Or would she turn the tables entirely? Everyone could feel it building, the sense that Crockett wasn't just preparing a reply. She was preparing a reckoning. And when it came, it wouldn't be loud or theatrical. It would be devastating. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't just have words. She had receipts. The room was holding its breath. Clooney had filled the space with arrogance, but now the silence belonged to Jasmine Crockett. She adjusted her microphone, sat a little taller, and began, not with fire, but with ice-cold precision. You say experience matters, George, she said evenly, her voice carrying across the auditorium. So let's talk about experience. The crowd shifted. Some leaned forward, sensing the pivot. Clooney smirked, confident she was walking into his trap. But Crockett wasn't playing his game. She was rewriting the rules. Let's start with where I come from. I didn't grow up with red carpets or private jets. I grew up watching neighbors lose their homes because the system failed them. I grew up fighting for kids in classrooms where textbooks were older than students. And when I chose law, it wasn't because it looked glamorous. It was because somebody had to stand up for people who couldn't afford a lawyer. That's the experience I bring. Murmurs of approval swept through the audience. Clooney's smirk flickered. Crockett pressed on, her tone tightening like a coiled spring. You say substance matters. Well, here's some substance. While you were filming Ocean's 11, I was representing tenants about to be thrown out on the street. While you were hosting dinners with world leaders, I was standing in court defending young men who'd been profiled just because of their skin. While you were smiling for cameras, I was fighting voter suppression in communities that never make the headlines. That's substance, George. That's receipts. Gasps, then applause. Clooney blinked, his jaw tightening. He tried to interject, but Crockett raised her hand slightly, commanding the floor without raising her voice. The power had shifted. And since you brought up relevance, she continued, let's talk about what being relevant really means. You see, relevance isn't about being famous. It isn't about how many magazine covers you've been on or how many people recognize you at a restaurant. Relevance is about impact. It's about whether the work you do changes people's lives. And on that front, George, I don't need Hollywood to validate me. The audience erupted into claps and shouts of support. Phones were already out, recording every word, every expression. This wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a performance of truth, the kind of moment that travels far beyond a single room. Clooney shifted in his seat, adjusting his cufflinks, forcing a smile. Now hold on, he began, his voice slightly strained. I'm not diminishing. But Crockett cut him off, her tone firm now. Yes, you are. And that's the problem. For too long, people like you, people with platforms built on privilege, have believed that you can minimize the work of those who don't fit your mold. You think you can define who belongs at the table. But here's the reality. The table is changing. And no amount of charm or smirks is going to stop it. The room roared. Clooney looked stunned, not used to losing control of the script. Crockett leaned back slightly, her calmness returning, like a conductor easing the orchestra after a crescendo. "This isn't about me and you," she said, her voice softer but sharper. "It's about what we choose to value as a nation. Do we value the voices of people who've lived the struggle, fought the fight, and earned their place through service? Or do we keep letting celebrity overshadow reality?" You could hear the weight in the silence that followed. It wasn't just rhetoric. It was a challenge, thrown not only at Clooney, but at every person watching. Crockett wasn't finished. She leaned forward again, her eyes locked on him. "Here's one last receipt, George. You say I'm playing dress-up in politics. But the difference between us is that my role isn't scripted. It's lived. When the cameras go away, my work continues. When the applause stops, the families I represent still need me. Can you say the same?" That line landed like a hammer. The crowd gasped, then exploded into cheers, applause, chants. Clooney opened his mouth, closed it again. There was nothing left to say. His charm, his quips, his celebrity aura, all of it evaporated in the face of Crockett's unshakable truth. For a moment, all he could do was sit there, staring, while the crowd turned its energy fully toward her. The camera zoomed in on his uneasy smile, then back to Crockett's steady gaze. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't needed to, because this wasn't a shouting match. It was a takedown by receipts, measured, undeniable, devastating. And just like that, the story had flipped. Clooney hadn't humiliated Crockett. He had humiliated himself. By underestimating her, by mocking her, he had given her the stage, and she had used it to redefine the entire conversation. What happened next wouldn't just stay in that room. It would spread through hashtags, through clips, through every platform hungry for a moment that revealed truth so clearly. The audience didn't just witness a clash. They witnessed a reckoning. And Clooney, the man who once controlled the spotlight with a smile, was now left blinking under its glare. But the world outside the room was about to react in ways neither of them could have predicted. The moment Jasmine Crockett finished speaking, the room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was an explosion of energy, the kind that shakes walls and ripples through every camera lens. The sound was raw, electric, undeniable. Clooney sat frozen, his trademark smirk gone, his eyes darting across the crowd as if searching for a lifeline. But there was none. The audience had already chosen its hero, and it wasn't him. Within minutes, the exchange was everywhere. Clips flew across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram like wildfire. Hashtags blazed into the trending bar. Hashtag receipts versus reels. Hashtag Crockett clapback. Hashtag dignity over fame. In living rooms across America, phones buzzed with notifications as friends tagged each other. "You have to see this. This is history." The responses came fast and fierce. Progressive commentators praised Crockett's composure and clarity. This wasn't just a rebuttal, one anchor declared on live television. This was a masterclass in dignity, dismantling arrogance. Memes flooded social feeds. Clooney's stunned face juxtaposed with Crockett's steady gaze, captions declaring, "She came with receipts." But it wasn't only progressives who noticed. Even those who once idolized Clooney for his activism began to question him. Was his humanitarian image just another performance? Was the Hollywood icon who once stood for justice now revealed as someone willing to mock it when confronted by a woman who refused to play his game? Celebrities weighed in. Musicians, actors, and athletes retweeted the clip, many adding their own commentary. "This is the energy we need in politics," one popular artist wrote. "Authenticity beats arrogance every time." Late-night hosts replayed the moment with incredulity. One quipped, "George Clooney's next movie? Silence of the Smirks, starring Jasmine Crockett." The audience roared. Meanwhile, Crockett's own supporters flooded social media with pride. Immigrant families, young activists, working mothers, all shared the clip with captions that read less like commentary and more like personal testimony. "She spoke for us. I felt seen. This is why representation matters." And the ripple effects didn't stop online. News outlets dedicated entire segments to dissecting the confrontation. Political analysts called it a defining cultural moment that exposed the rift between image and substance in American life. Editorials compared Clooney's dismissal to a pattern of elitism that often sidelines women of color. Crockett wasn't framed as a victim of the insult. She was framed as its conqueror. Clooney, on the other hand, struggled. His team issued no immediate comment, hoping silence might contain the fire. But silence only fanned it. The absence of apology became its own headline. Clips of him shifting in his chair while Crockett spoke went viral under the caption, "When the receipts are louder than your reputation." And then came the think pieces. Writers drew connections between Clooney's arrogance and a broader culture of celebrity entitlement. They pointed out how easily fame can blind people to the realities faced by those outside their bubble. What Jasmine Crockett showed us, one columnist wrote, is that real influence doesn't come from movie sets. It comes from lived experience, from standing in the trenches with the people you serve. The story snowballed. In classrooms, teachers played the clip to illustrate courage under pressure. On college campuses, students debated the moment in political science courses. Even church sermons referenced it as an example of truth prevailing over ego. Crockett had not only silenced Clooney, she had sparked a national conversation. And through it all, Clooney's regret became more visible. Paparazzi shots captured him looking weary, avoiding questions. Friends whispered that he hadn't expected the backlash to hit this hard. He had underestimated the cultural moment, underestimated Crockett, underestimated the power of receipts in an age where everything is recorded and replayed. But Crockett? She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her response had already spoken louder than any follow-up could. In interviews, she deflected attention away from herself and back to the people she represented. "This isn't about me," she said firmly. "It's about the work. It's about making sure our communities are never dismissed again." That humility only amplified her power. The nation wasn't just watching Crockett. They were rallying behind her. Her name, once unfamiliar to many, was now spoken with admiration, even reverence. And as the wave of support grew, one truth became undeniable. Clooney's insult had backfired spectacularly. What he thought would diminish her had instead elevated her. What he meant as a dismissal had become her defining moment. But Crockett wasn't done. She knew that this conversation couldn't stop with applause or hashtags. She had one more message to deliver. A truth bigger than Clooney, bigger than the insult, bigger than the moment itself. And when she spoke it, the nation would feel it. When the dust began to settle, and the viral clips had made their way into every living room and newsroom, Jasmine Crockett stood before the cameras once more. Not to gloat, not to relish in George Clooney's downfall, but to remind America of something deeper. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm presence drew people in, the way a lighthouse draws ships through a storm. "This moment," she began, "is not about celebrities or insults. It's about dignity. It's about respect. And it's about the kind of country we want to be." Her words sliced through the noise. Crockett reframed the entire exchange, transforming a heated clash into a universal lesson. She reminded the audience that arrogance, no matter how polished or famous, can never withstand the quiet force of truth. "We cannot let ego stand taller than empathy," she declared. "We cannot let fame drown out the voices of everyday people." And in that instant, the narrative shifted again. This was no longer Clooney versus Crockett. It was arrogance versus dignity. It was cynicism versus resilience. It was the America of exclusion, elitism, and dismissal standing face to face with an America that believed in justice, representation, and shared humanity. Crockett told stories, not of herself, but of the people she served. The single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep her children in school. The immigrant father who sacrificed sleep so his kids could chase their dreams. The young activists who marched in the streets, demanding a future where their voices mattered. "When I speak," Crockett said, "I carry them with me. Their struggles are the receipts that cannot be denied." And people listened. They leaned in, not because it was sensational, but because it was sincere. The energy that had once swirled around Clooney's insult now poured into Crockett's vision. She had turned a viral moment into a moral movement. Commentators noted the transformation. "This is how you turn pain into power," one journalist wrote. Crockett didn't just win a debate. She elevated the discourse. Churches replayed her words in Sunday sermons. Classrooms dissected her message as a model of reframing. Families around dinner tables talked about dignity, about respect, about what it means to truly be American. And in living rooms across the nation, people who had once felt invisible suddenly felt seen. "She spoke for us," many said. Not just for women, not just for immigrants, but for anyone who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told they didn't belong. Meanwhile, Clooney's silence grew louder. His refusal to engage only underscored Crockett's point. Arrogance fades, but truth endures. Where he had tried to belittle, she had uplifted. Where he had sought dominance, she had built connection. The moral was undeniable. Dignity is not just a personal shield. It is a collective force. It binds communities, strengthens identities, and dismantles arrogance in ways ego can never predict. Crockett's calm strength reminded the nation that in the end, what matters most is not the insult hurled at us, but how we respond to it. And so the story became less about the sting of Clooney's words and more about the brilliance of Crockett's response. She had shown the world that power doesn't lie in a sharp tongue. It lies in steady hands, clear vision, and the courage to turn hurt into hope. The lesson resonated far beyond politics. It became a story about what each person carries inside them when confronted with dismissal or disrespect, about the ability to stand tall, to answer arrogance not with anger, but with unshakable truth. And Crockett, standing in the glow of that moment, left the nation with one final reminder. No insult can erase your worth. No arrogance can diminish your dignity. The question is, when you are tested, will you answer with fear or will you answer with truth? The crowd erupted again, but this time, the applause wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who saw themselves in her story. It was for every person who had ever been underestimated and was ready, at last, to rise. The debate was over, but the movement was only beginning. And so, what began as an insult meant to belittle ended as a moment that inspired millions. George Clooney thought he could laugh off Jasmine Crockett, but instead, his arrogance gave her the stage to deliver a message that echoed across the nation. In just a few minutes, Crockett transformed a Hollywood put-down into a lesson in dignity, truth, and resilience. This story isn't just about one exchange. It's about what happens when we choose to stand tall in the face of arrogance. It's about reminding ourselves, again and again, that respect is not granted by fame or fortune. Respect is earned through integrity, through courage, and through the refusal to back down when others try to silence you. And that's why this moment matters. Because it proves that the voices so often dismissed, the voices of women, of immigrants, of working families, are the ones carrying the receipts of lived experience. They're the ones who remind America of its promise. And no insult, no smirk, no celebrity status can erase that truth. But here's the thing. This story doesn't end with Jasmine Crockett. It continues with you. Every share, every conversation, every time you refuse to let arrogance have a last word, you're part of this movement. You're proving that dignity doesn't just belong on a debate stage. It belongs in classrooms, in workplaces, in households, in every corner of this country. So if this story moved you, if it made you think twice about the kind of world you want to live in, don't just scroll past. Be part of the momentum. Share this story. Subscribe for more voices that challenge arrogance and uplift dignity. And most of all, carry this lesson forward. Truth will always outlast the insult. Because when receipts speak, the world listens.